In the dead of night, Marcus Aurelius would retreat to his private chambers and write thoughts so dark, so disturbing, so contrary to everything he taught publicly that he never intended them to see the light of day. These weren't the noble meditations history remembers. These were the raw, unfiltered thoughts of a man who had discovered a secret so powerful and so dangerous that he buried it in the shadows of his private journal, hidden from his subjects, concealed from his philosophers, kept even from his closest advisors. This wasn't the Marcus Aurelius who spoke of virtue and wisdom to the masses. This was the Marcus Aurelius who understood the brutal reality of human nature and used that understanding to build an empire that lasted centuries. The secret he tried to hide wasn't about becoming a better person. It was about becoming an unstoppable force in a world that would devour the weak without hesitation. But here's what Marcus feared most. If this dark knowledge fell into the wrong hands, if people without moral foundations discovered these techniques, they could become monsters. So he buried his secret, locked it away, hoped it would die with him. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and tonight you're about to learn the dark Stoic secret that Marcus Aurelius tried to take to his grave. This isn't philosophy for the faint of heart. This isn't wisdom for those who prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. And this certainly isn't knowledge for anyone who isn't ready to wield power responsibly. If you're ready to discover the dark secret that made Marcus Aurelius not just a philosopher, but an emperor who couldn't be defeated, manipulated, or broken, smash that like button. Share this forbidden knowledge with someone strong enough to handle it. Comment below about which dark truth you've discovered about human nature. And subscribe to this channel for more hidden wisdom that reveals how the world really works. Marcus Aurelius wrote these words in his private journal, words that scholars have tried to explain away, soften, or ignore entirely. Remember that very little disturbs the happiness of a wise man, and that even pain and death are not to be feared when they serve a greater purpose. But the dark secret lies in what he meant by greater purpose. Marcus didn't fear pain and death because he had discovered something that most people never realize. The person willing to sacrifice everything, including their own comfort, safety, and life, becomes the most dangerous person in any room. This isn't about noble self-sacrifice. This is about the cold calculation of someone who understands that the willingness to lose everything gives you power over everyone who still has something to lose. The dark secret that Marcus tried to hide is this. True Stoic power doesn't come from being good. It comes from being willing to do what others cannot or will not do, regardless of the personal cost. Marcus understood that in a world of people desperately clinging to their possessions, their reputations, their comfort, their safety, the person who has already mentally let go of everything becomes untouchable, unstoppable, and ultimately undefeatable. This is why his enemies feared him, why his allies respected him, and why his empire endured long after weaker rulers had fallen. Let me tell you about Robert, a modern man who accidentally discovered this dark secret. Robert was a middle manager at a tech company, overlooked, undervalued, passed over for promotions while watching less qualified people advance around him. For years, Robert played by the rules, tried to be nice, avoided conflict, hoped that good work would be rewarded. He was everything society tells men to be: agreeable, non-threatening, politically correct. And he was miserable, powerless, invisible. Then Robert's wife left him, taking half his assets and his children. His company laid him off during downsizing. His health began to fail from stress. Robert had lost everything he thought defined him, and in that moment of complete destruction, he made a discovery that changed everything. Robert realized that his attachment to outcomes had made him weak. His need for approval had made him controllable. His fear of loss had made him a victim. But now that he had nothing left to lose, he became something entirely different. Robert started his own company, not because he was passionate about business, but because he was willing to fail completely while his competitors were terrified of failure. He negotiated deals that others wouldn't touch because he genuinely didn't care if they fell through. He made decisions that seemed reckless to others because he had already accepted the worst-case scenario. Within 2 years, Robert had built a multi-million-dollar company, not through positive thinking or motivational strategies, but through the dark Stoic secret. When you have nothing to lose, you have everything to gain, and when you're willing to lose everything, Others will give you anything to avoid their own losses. This is the darkness that Marcus Aurelius understood, but rarely spoke about openly. He knew that the person who has mentally accepted death cannot be intimidated by threats. The person who has released attachment to possessions cannot be controlled through greed or fear of poverty. The person who doesn't need social approval cannot be manipulated through shame or ostracism. Marcus had discovered that detachment isn't just peace. It's power, raw, undiluted, and absolutely terrifying to those who still live as slaves to their desires and fears. Marcus wrote in his hidden meditations, "Death smiles at us all, but all a man can do is smile back." But the dark truth behind this seemingly poetic statement is tactical. When you're not afraid to die, you can make choices that terrify those who are desperately trying to stay alive. When you're not afraid to lose everything, you can take risks that paralyze those who are clinging to what they have. When you're not afraid to be hated, you can tell truths that silence those who need to be liked. This isn't philosophy. This is psychological warfare, and Marcus Aurelius was perhaps the greatest psychological warrior who ever lived. The Roman Empire wasn't built by nice guys giving motivational speeches about virtue. It was built by men who understood that in a brutal world, the person willing to embrace brutality strategically would dominate those who pretended brutality didn't exist. Marcus knew that his enemies would use every weapon available: deception, violence, betrayal, manipulation. His dark secret was that the Stoic who had mentally prepared for and accepted these realities could counter them more effectively than the idealist who hoped they wouldn't happen. Seneca understood this darkness as well, which is why he could serve under Nero, one of history's most notorious tyrants, and not only survive, but prosper. Seneca's dark secret was that he knew how to be useful to dangerous people without becoming their victim. He understood that in a world of predators, you either become predator, prey, or something else entirely. The person who understands predators so well that they become indispensable to them while remaining untouchable by them. Seneca wrote, "Every new man is a fresh chance to either make a friend or create an enemy." But what he meant was much darker. Every interaction is an opportunity to position yourself advantageously, and the person who understands human nature most deeply will always have the superior position. Let me share the story of Elizabeth, a woman who discovered this dark wisdom through betrayal. Elizabeth was a successful attorney who believed in fairness, justice, and playing by the rules. She worked at a prestigious law firm where she mentored younger lawyers, shared credit generously, and trusted her colleagues completely. Then Elizabeth discovered that her closest friend at the firm, someone she had helped for years, had been stealing her clients, taking credit for her work, and actively sabotaging her reputation with partners. The betrayal was so complete, so calculating, so vicious, that it shattered Elizabeth's worldview entirely. At first, Elizabeth tried to fight back using the same ethical standards she had always maintained. She documented the truth, presented evidence, appealed to fairness and justice, and she was destroyed for it. The friend had been more strategic, had better political connections, had already positioned Elizabeth as an unstable troublemaker. Elizabeth lost her job, her reputation, and her faith in human decency. But in that darkness, Elizabeth found something that transformed her into someone far more formidable than she had ever been as a good person. Elizabeth realized that her commitment to playing fairly in an unfair world had made her vulnerable to people who understood the real rules of human interaction. She had been operating under the assumption that others shared her values, while they had been operating under the assumption that she was either useful or threatening. Elizabeth's dark awakening taught her that in every interaction, people are constantly calculating advantage, measuring threat levels, and positioning for dominance, even when they smile and speak of friendship and cooperation. When Elizabeth started her own practice, she was completely different. She still maintained her ethical standards in legal matters, but she now understood human nature with brutal clarity. She could read people's true motivations instantly, anticipate betrayal before it happened, and position herself so advantageously that potential enemies found it more profitable to become allies. Elizabeth hadn't become evil, she had become realistic about evil, and that realism made her untouchable. Within 5 years, she had built one of the most successful law practices in the city, not because she had compromised her integrity, but because she no longer compromised her understanding of how the world actually works. This is the dark secret that Marcus Aurelius knew but feared to teach openly. Good people who understand evil are more powerful than evil people who don't understand good. Marcus maintained his virtue not out of naivety about human nature, but out of complete understanding of human nature. He knew that virtue combined with strategic thinking creates an invincible combination, but he also knew that strategic thinking without virtue creates monsters. The darkness in Marcus's private writings reveals his understanding that most human behavior is driven by fear. Fear of death, fear of loss, fear of social rejection, fear of physical pain, fear of being alone, fear of being powerless. He realized that the person who has conquered these fears within themselves gains tremendous advantage over those who are still controlled by them. But Marcus also understood the terrible responsibility that comes with this knowledge. He wrote in his hidden notes, "The man who is not moved by the storms that shake others must be very careful not to become the storm himself." Marcus's dark secret included his understanding of what he called the theater of virtue. He knew that most people's moral behavior wasn't driven by genuine virtue, but by fear of social consequences. They were good because being good was rewarded and being bad was punished, not because they had internalized goodness as a value. This meant that their virtue was conditional, strategic, and ultimately unreliable. Marcus realized that understanding this gave him enormous predictive power. He could anticipate how people would behave under pressure by understanding what they truly feared losing. Let me tell you about Michael, a man who learned this dark wisdom through business warfare. Michael had invented a revolutionary product and started a company to bring it to market. He believed that having the best product would guarantee success, that quality would triumph over politics, that innovation would overcome obstacles. Michael was brilliant but naive about the darkness of human nature in competitive environments. His competitors didn't try to create better products. They tried to destroy Michael's company through legal warfare, industrial espionage, market manipulation, and character assassination. At first, Michael was shocked and paralyzed by the viciousness of the attacks. He couldn't understand why people would resort to such tactics instead of simply competing on merit. He tried to fight back using ethical methods while his enemies used every dirty trick available. Michael was losing everything, not because his product was inferior, but because he had brought virtue to a knife fight. Then Michael had his dark awakening. He realized that business, like war, isn't won by the most virtuous. It's won by those who best understand and can counter their opponent's strategies. Michael didn't abandon his ethical standards, but he stopped assuming his competitors shared them. He hired security experts who understood corporate espionage. He brought in lawyers who specialized in aggressive legal defense. He learned to read people's true motivations instead of listening to their stated intentions. Most importantly, Michael learned to project strength even when he felt vulnerable, because he understood that predators target those who appear weak. Within 2 years, Michael had not only saved his company, but had driven several competitors out of the market entirely, not through unethical means, but through superior understanding of how competitive warfare actually works. The dark secret that Marcus Aurelius tried to hide reveals itself in his private admission. "I have learned to expect the worst from people so that I am never disappointed and occasionally pleasantly surprised." This wasn't pessimism. This was strategic realism. Marcus understood that the person who prepares for betrayal will rarely be betrayed, while the person who expects loyalty will often be disappointed. The person who understands that everyone has a price will rarely be surprised by corruption, while the person who believes in unconditional integrity will often be devastated by its absence. But here's where the darkness becomes truly profound. Marcus realized that this knowledge creates a terrible isolation. When you see people clearly, when you understand their fears and motivations and predictable weaknesses, you can never again have the comfortable illusion of genuine human connection based on shared values and mutual respect. You realize that most relationships are transactions, most friendships are strategic alliances, and most love is conditional on continued benefit or emotional satisfaction. This knowledge gives you power, but it also separates you from the innocent joy that comes from trusting others completely. Marcus wrote in his darkest entries, "The price of seeing clearly is the loss of beautiful illusions." He understood that once you know how to read people's true motivations, how to anticipate their betrayals, how to position yourself advantageously in every interaction, you can never again experience the naive trust that makes simple human relationships possible. You become like a chess master playing against people who think they're playing checkers. You can predict their moves, counter their strategies, and control the outcome, but you can never again enjoy the game as an equal participant. Epictetus, who had experienced the ultimate darkness of being owned as property by another human being, understood this secret from a different angle. He learned that the person who accepts the worst possible outcome as not only possible but probable gains a kind of invincibility that others cannot comprehend. Epictetus wrote, "Wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few wants." But the dark truth behind this statement is that the person who wants nothing can take everything from those who want much, because desperation makes people controllable, while contentment makes you uncontrollable. The darkest aspect of Stoic wisdom isn't about becoming emotionless or detached from life. It's about understanding that in a world where most people are driven by emotions, the person who can control their emotions while understanding others' emotions has enormous strategic advantage. Marcus knew that anger makes people predictable, greed makes them manipulable, fear makes them controllable, and pride makes them defeatable. He also knew that the person who had mastered these emotions within themselves could use others' emotional reactions to achieve their goals, while remaining unaffected by emotional manipulation themselves. Let me share the final story about David, a man who discovered the ultimate dark secret. David was a humanitarian who spent years working in war zones, refugee camps, and disaster areas, genuinely trying to help people and make the world better. But David gradually realized something that shattered his idealistic worldview. Most of the suffering he was trying to alleviate was caused by other people who were profiting from that suffering. Warlords who prevented peace because war was profitable. Politicians who maintained poverty because dependent populations were controllable. Organizations that perpetuated problems because solving them would eliminate their funding. David's dark awakening was the realization that evil isn't usually dramatic or obvious, it's systematic and strategic. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who commit random acts of violence. They're the ones who create systems that generate violence while keeping their own hands clean. The most powerful predators aren't the ones who attack directly. They're the ones who create conditions where others do their attacking for them. David understood that in a world where sophisticated evil operates systematically, naive good becomes complicit through its own ineffectiveness. But David's final realization was the darkest of all. The only way to effectively oppose systematic evil is to understand it completely, which means understanding the dark aspects of human nature that make such evil possible. David learned to think like his enemies not because he wanted to become them, but because understanding their strategies was the only way to defeat them. He became extraordinarily effective at his humanitarian work, not because he maintained his innocence about human nature, but because he lost it and gained something far more valuable, the ability to outmaneuver those who profit from suffering. This is the complete dark secret that Marcus Aurelius tried to hide. In a world where evil is sophisticated, strategic, and systemic, good must become equally sophisticated, strategic, and systemic, or it will be destroyed by the very evil it refuses to understand. The person who maintains virtue while understanding vice becomes invincible, but the person who maintains innocence while refusing to acknowledge darkness becomes a victim. Marcus understood that the highest form of virtue isn't naive goodness. It's informed goodness that chooses to do right while fully understanding how to do wrong. The emperor wrote in his final hidden entry, "I have learned to love justice not because I am blind to injustice, but because I see injustice so clearly that I know justice is the only sustainable path to power." Marcus's dark secret wasn't about becoming evil. It was about understanding evil so completely that virtue becomes not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength that cannot be defeated because it operates with full knowledge of what it's up against. When you understand this dark secret, you realize why Marcus Aurelius tried to hide it. This knowledge creates people who cannot be lied to, manipulated, controlled, or defeated through the normal methods that work on ordinary people. They become dangerous not because they're willing to do evil, but because they understand evil well enough to counter it while maintaining their own integrity. They can't be bought because they don't want what money can buy. They can't be threatened because they've already accepted loss. They can't be flattered because they don't need approval. And they can't be broken because they've already been broken and rebuilt themselves stronger. This is the ultimate darkness of Stoic wisdom. It creates individuals so mentally and emotionally independent that they become immune to the systems of control that keep ordinary people in line. They don't rebel against society. They simply operate outside its influence while achieving their goals within its structures. They become like Marcus Aurelius himself, philosopher-emperors who wield power through understanding rather than force, who achieve their objectives through strategic virtue rather than tactical vice, and who remain undefeated because they fight battles on levels their opponents don't even know exist. The dark secret Marcus tried to hide wasn't about becoming a monster. It was about becoming someone so formidable that monsters avoid confronting you, so strategically wise that enemies become allies, and so mentally unbreakable that victory becomes inevitable not through conquest but through the simple reality that you cannot be stopped by anything others might try to do to you. This is the forbidden knowledge that transforms philosophy from academic theory into practical power. And it's the reason why those who truly understand Stoicism don't just read about it. They use it to become unstoppable forces in whatever domain they choose to dominate.